Thank you for your Thank you for your patience with us getting everything all together. I'm super excited about this, and I'll tell you a little bit why. But let me first tell you who I am, where I'm at, and a little bit about how this connects for me with the work with Atlantic Institute. So I'm Lorana Hughes. I am your field trip leader for today. We're going on a history trek, a living history trek. But I came in contact with the Atlantic Institute some years back when I was living in South Carolina. And part of their work was really about diversity, about helping us do the work of working to learn about each other, not so much about our differences, although those are there, but learning about our differences so that we develop an appreciation, which gives us a greater capacity to be together with our differences in community. And I just felt like that really aligns with my values and my life work. And so I'm always excited. And I was on the board. And some of the things that I did was I did a couple of times a year, did some cultural classes about various things. And then I retired and moved to South America. And so I'm coming to you this evening from Cuenca, Ecuador, where I now live full time. And as I was leaving the board, they said, would you like to continue to do field trips and cultural classes? And I said, absolutely. And so it's been a joy to be able to offer a variety of things that I feel help us learn about our differences. And learn that we can appreciate our differences. It gives us the richness and diversity like a tapestry. And so I am pleased to be a part of offering these classes and cultural field trips and explorations. I'm an explorer already, so being able to share with you lets me get a greater return on the energy that I put into the fun and the joy that I have in life. So I'm glad to have you here. As you heard, we had some problems last month when I was going to offer this, but I want to tell you why I picked the date last month. Last month, there was one of the celebrations was about the abolition of slavery. And I picked that day for a reason, and I'll share a little bit about that. Partly, it tied into what I'm going to be sharing with you about. Umi, which is a title, I'll tell you a little bit about that. But Uni Nandedi is one of the first people. If you follow the continuation of the abolition of slavery, we move forward, and the next step of that was the abolition of segregation. And we are fortunate to have some of living history. It's kind of like the Ruby Dees. When Ruby Dees was integrating the elementary school level, there were individuals integrating at the college level. The very first Black student to be admitted to Newberry College, which is a college that's still in existence today in Newberry, South Carolina, which was very near the community that I'm still involved in, even from South America, that the very first person was a Black woman named Umi Nandedi. And very similar to the story of Ruby Dees, where there was supposed to be a group of them going in, and the morning of, or the day of, or some hours before, many of them fell away for various reasons and possibly fear of their life. And there stood one person brave enough, strong enough to be able to make that entrance by themselves. And a few months back, I had the opportunity of interviewing this person. Now, the history for me is in 2012 and 2013, I had the opportunity to work as a historian. I wasn't a historian per se, but I had been working with one of the reconstruction communities in our country that's still in existence. One of the communities that would have been the first places that Blacks could have owned land and set up homes for themselves and their families after Juneteenth, after the abolition of slavery. And so I felt that tie-in, that connection of that particular holiday that was last month, and then showing the continuation to even a living part of our history that's still alive for us to be able to document the stories. Because it's memories if you just tell the story. When you document it, it makes it history, history that can be passed down. I had the opportunity of working in a community that was one of the first Black communities. We hear about Black Wall Street, but part of what I learned, not coming from the South originally, I grew up on the West Coast of Northern California, but coming to the South and living in these communities to understand that the very first opportunities were these communities, and many of them thrived. I had the opportunity in a real strange set of circumstances. I was working with people in the community garden of that community who were fighting like David and Goliath against, of all people, the Department of Transportation. You see, back in the day when the highway systems were being developed, the folk tale on the ground was that the riots broke out during a period of time that these were being designed. And the government decided that they would make sure that if outrisings like that ever came up, they could always put tanks on the ground in these communities. And many communities where individuals that look like me, that were descendants of people who may have been enslaved, they built the highways, rerouted the highways through these communities. And Macon, Georgia is one of those communities. That they did things like, in Macon, Georgia, there's a place called the Half House. And it's called the Half House because the Department of Transportation at that time, with careless recklessness, said, we need this space. And they literally cut the house in half, boarded up the end of it, shrugged their shoulders as if it should just be acceptable. And it happened because at that time, people that looked like me and that had heritage like me didn't have as much of a voice as we have today. However, when the highway system came back through in the early 2000s, and they were going to do some development work, and the highways needed it. There were some dangerous connections. If you know that area or ever drive through that area going I-75 into Macon, Georgia, I-75 goes north and south, but at that junction, I-16 goes out to the port. The backstory is that they're deepening the ports and trying to move the commerce of port traffic into Georgia. And that's a dangerous highway. So development needed to be done for progress to happen, economic progress. But the residual impact was that it was going to damage this community further. A community that had been damaged during a time when they had a voice. And there were two, I call them honorary senior citizens. They cussed a whole bunch, but they had been part of that community when it didn't have a voice. And they said, we now have a voice, and we will fight to make sure that restitution is done, and that if you come and do damage here, that we will be the community will be compensated for that damage. And in one of what has been one of the biggest social justice awards paid by DOT, they won. I learned about dirty politics and big money and how these highway bills and contracts and the development work happens decades before anything happens on the ground. But I was a part of that for 5 years with this fight. And part of what they said was, you're going to do justice. One of the things that they demanded, and they won, was that they go in and collect the oral history of this community, of how this community specifically was able to thrive. I got called in to be the historian on that project. I got a real in-depth understanding of some of the history of how communities, Black communities, worked, how they grew and how they thrived. What I remembered most pronouncedly was I had the opportunity to research, and I was able to go back and research the original newspaper ads, where when these lots were being sold to Black people who would not have been called Black people at the time, the advertisements advertised to better class Negroes. They were the ones that went and bought land in this community. They thrived at the time where the Black college systems were just developing. They were a brand new thing, and education was seen as the way out. It helped me to develop a passion for public history, and that is people telling their stories, because what I realized during that time is many of the historians reported about things that were relevant to them. And for the 150 years from civil rights, from slavery ending until about the time that I was working with this project, the historians had reported about history that was important to them, which left out things like women. It left out the history from the perspective of Black people. And it created a passion in me of how powerful it is when people tell their own story. When you hear it in their words, you hear the energy and the pain. You hear a little bit more about what it cost. A decade more later, I ran into a lady in Newberry, South Carolina. And I began to talk to her about her story. And I said, has anyone documented your story? And she said, I've been trying to tell my story, but it's so painful. And after talking to her and her giving me the honor of putting her trust in me, she allowed me to record our interview. Today, I'll be sharing with you about a 30-minute excerpt of that interview that I prepared. It cannot tell you the whole story. But part of what my hope was in recording this is for us to have a historic record of the cost that the one paid. She went under the guise that there were going to be 10 going with her. And when she began the journey and school started, there was but one, and it was her. And so I hope that even though that day, the international recognition of the abolition of slavery is over, that recognition day that someone created at some point to pay homage to that, I hope that the spirit of that still lives today as you hear the story. I've allowed her to tell the story in her own words. But in taking the time to interview her, I could feel only a token amount of what the cost for her has been. She's one of those people that I hope at some point in the near future, while there's still the opportunity to record it, I have the wherewithal and the means and the resources to be able to help her tell a story. But here's one of the challenges. And it's one of those things that I'm still wrestling with. My life work is the work of healing people so that community gets better, because we are a community. And when our better gets best, when our best gets better, community is better. But I heard the pain of even telling her story. And so even her telling this brings back up things that have not been healed. And so her telling her story was a sacrifice. It's a sacrifice that I acknowledge, and I want to acknowledge today. I know even telling the story has caused a re-traumatization from experiences that she still holds, many of them unhealed in her heart. And so part of this sharing is for us to take value. Because what happens is she's put the energy into living these experiences. And I hope that by us sharing, hopefully that I have done honor to her experience in sharing this with you, but that we can get something of value out of it, because then there's some extra value that the energy she has put into life will give to us all. And so I'm excited to share her story and her words. I have gotten value out of what she has sacrificially given, even in telling the story. And my hope is that you will get some value out of hearing her story to understand the cost of not just her, but many, but specifically to understand the cost that she personally has paid for us to have privileges that we have in society today. And it's not just a privilege for Black people. I have had the benefit of going to college. I've had the benefit of all of my life being able to have education that wasn't in a segregated environment, but that she has done the work for us as humanity, as American culture, to be better. Whether we are Black or whether we are white, we are better because some of these things have ended. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. Do we have a whole bunch of work to do? Yes, we do. But because the Umis were willing to stand and withstand the harm, for making the statements. We all are better. And so, with gratitude, I want to share this living history for us today. Um, Listen to her words as she tells her story. And then, what I thought I'd do is, with the time that we have left afterwards, we can just have a chat um, about how it made you feel, about what you can take away from this, um, what resonates for you in the story that she's going to tell. So I give you her story in her words. Take a listen. I hope it will bless you how as it has blessed me, not only hearing the story, but having the opportunity to touch living history in this way. So let me get my technology together. And let me go here. If you can't hear as I get started, please somebody unmute and say something.
No, I believe volume is fine. I can hear the music.
Freshman year orientation. Well, prior to the orientation time, we enrolled in Newberry College, or applied to Newberry College as part of a dare to my grandmother. And my grandmother, who was very, very strict, wanted me to enroll in either Benedict or Allen, and I wanted to go to South Carolina State, Johnson C. Smith, or Spelman. And there was nothing wrong with Benedict Allen, but I knew she would be there every day. She would catch a ride, a bus, or something. And you never knew what time. And I knew she would come at the time I would be talking. We could be having a group study. But if there was a male there, if there was a male presence, that's not what she saw it as. And I knew what her reaction would be. And so I candidly said to her, well, if I got to camp on your doorstep, I might as well stay in your house. So I will enroll in Newberry College. Well, there was no way that I would have been accepted because in my mind, I was from the wrong side of the tracks. And in her mind, too, who you think gonna take you at Newberry College? I mean, we just made it a joke. No, yeah. So I did apply. And lo and behold, when we were about to concede to each other, we sent, talked to the guidance counselor and said, well, we changed our minds, we didn't think the application was there anyway. And next thing we knew, the representatives from the college was knocking on our door. And they said, we're hoping that you would reconsider and enroll. And my grandmother said, no, she can't go by herself. He said, well, that'd be 10. That'd be 9 others and 10 altogether. So that's how I came up with the concept, where are the other 9? Because when I arrived for orientation, I looked around, I said, okay, where are they? So I'm thinking, well, they're here somewhere. So what I decided to do was to sit in the 4th row on the left side in the first seat. And when everybody started coming in, they sat 3 rows behind me on both sides of the aisle. And then there were 3 empty rows in front of me on both sides of the aisle. There were 6 empty rows, except in the chair that I was sitting in. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, am I in the wrong area? Is this reserved for somebody special? But anyway, to make a long story short, we're in the president addressing the freshman class. So nobody says anything to me. So I said, well, I'm just going to stay here and see what happens. And I'm trying to recall, I don't think he ever said my name. I think he said we have a new experience this year. And we're not going to ask her to stand. So I'm saying to myself, I think it's obvious what the new experience is. You don't have to ask me to stand. I've got 6 empty rows, on both sides of the aisle. And so we finish with the orientation. And I was so excited. I said, well, now I'll get to see the others. Got up, went outside, looked around. Okay. They're just late coming. Maybe they're not coming today, but they just had a difficult time. Or maybe not. They just, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, they're out of state students, so they haven't finished up everything. So they're coming maybe next week or maybe 3 or 4 days ahead of us, So anyway, a young lady by the name of Christian Vaverin, she told me, she walked over to me and she said to me, she said, I'm accustomed to people of color. She said, my father is in the service. And she said, you're going to be all right. And she gave me a hug, and that perked me up. That made me feel so much better that she took that opportunity and that time to make me feel comfortable, because she could tell I was beginning to get uncomfortable. Because like I said, I was expecting the other students, the other 9 Black students to come up. While I'm sitting there in orientation, I'm saying to myself, well, they're sitting in the back of the auditorium. That's what I'm thinking. Oh, okay. So the day goes by, and Christine stays with me. She stayed with me during the entire time until it's time for us to leave to go home. So that was that experience. I don't how I got through it. I really don't remember. No, but like I said, I believe Christine helped me. I knew she did. I asked the academic dean, and I asked him, I said, you said there was going to be 10 of us, and where are the other 9? And he said, oh, we changed our mind. We're going to wait and see what happens to you first. I said, oh, no. That's not what you explained to my grandmother and me. You said that give it a month. And one of the things they said was when they was talking to us, with the other 9 children, she'll have a chance to interact with students from other places and still be at home. I said, I remember you saying that to my grandmother. That's why we reconsidered and decided to let me attend. So he said, well, no, we have to wait and see what happens to you. And again, I'm going like, I don't think so. So I said, well, now, you all told us that if I weren't satisfied or didn't feel comfortable, that I could leave. He said, oh, no, you can't transfer. I said, oh, yes, I can. I said, I don't know why I can't transfer. He said, you're in a position wherein you have to stay. And at that time, I did not know, understand the reason that I was really there. I thought that it was because they were accepting diversity. But later, we learned that the college was about to go bankrupt. All the old money had died out. The children at that time were not putting their money in the college. They did not have sentimental values. And the college had taken every step possible to stay open. Finally, they had to apply for federal funding. And one of the requirements for federal funding was diversity. And they had to meet 2 criteria. They had to have a person of color. At that time, we went as Black. And they had to have more females on campus. So they got all that criteria met in one person. And so, like I said, at protesting, and then they just came out and told me, if you leave, you will not receive a collegiate education. You nor your descendants. And I'm saying, how can you do that? I said, how, you don't have any control over black colleges, you know? And they said, yes, we do. And you got to remember now, this was 1966. So they were the powers to be. And after pleading, crying, begging, I mean, I tried to recall where we were. And finally, I had to make a choice. I had to think about myself, or I had to think about my people, my family. You know, when you think about your children, your grandchildren not going to college because your little pride was hurt, that's a difficult decision. So I decided, I prayed. I was 17 years old, just 17. And I prayed, I said, God, please help me to make the right decision. I said, because I am the first. I am the first in the family to even graduate high school. So now here I am attending a prestigious all-white male-dominated college. Ooh, what a weight. That was the world on your shoulders. And if I walk away, then my family line, my descendants won't be able to attend college. So I realized I had to put on my big girl drawers and pull them up. My freshman year, um, it it was bittersweet. As I said, Christine helped a lot by her being there. But then guess what? Because she was military, she called herself a military brat. And because she was a military brat, guess what? She was being transferred again because daddy was moving. And so I'm saying to myself, okay, now what am I going to do? And I guess this must have occurred after being there for about a week or 2 weeks. And so finally, another person came to me. Her name was Nancy Dennis, Nancy Seal at the time. And she came to me and she was real sweet. She said, I'm Nancy Seal. She said, I'm accustomed to being around black people. She was from Charleston, South Carolina. She said, they asked me to be your monitor, your mentor. So I said, okay. And she gave me the key to her room. She said, here's the key to my room. Anytime you need to rest between classes, you're more than welcome. And that just perked me up. You know, I said, oh, thank you, Jesus. Thank God. I won't have to be here by myself. And I worked in the library with the work study, as a work study program. And they were very nice. Like I said, I tell people, it was bittersweet, but more sweet than bitter. You know, it was a long time before people used to ask me to describe my experience at Newberry College. And I couldn't describe it because, like I said, as sweet as there were in the bittersweet, things like that, they said there's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And you can talk about the good, you can talk about the bad, but sometimes that ugliness, you just can't talk about it. It happened. You can't do anything about it. It's over with. Move forward. And yet you feel that you need to talk about it so that it doesn't happen to anyone else. And I suppressed that for a long, long time. I'm 75 years old, and it still bothers me. But for 3 years on that campus, they really did not admit another African American, male or female. And my senior year, but I would tell myself, let me share this, each year, and this was another way I was able to get through the situation, I would say, well, they're coming. They're coming. Freshman year, I said, well, they're coming. Maybe this semester. That is one thing that helped me to go through this. was the fact that somebody's going to come. And they did. They came when I was a senior and they were freshmen. And they had to come because at that time, HEW, which was the Office for Civil Rights now, were on campus. They came to visit. And I think the administrators thought that they only had to show an attempt at diversity. But HEW said, no, you have to sustain, maintain diversity in order to get, don't show us that they wanted to say, well, we had a person on campus and she graduated. And so we're making the effort. We're making the effort. And so one thing I do recall is this was my senior year. I knew what real power was. I had so much power at that particular time. As I said, HEW came on campus to review the situation. That particular week, and that was another thing, they thought that HEW was just going to be there for a day. And they found out HEW was going to be there for a week. And guess who they were going to interview? Yes. So I didn't know anything about it until that Monday. I worked in the library, as I said, and we all had the same type of duties. And one of the duties that everybody had and shared was to vacuum the floors, the carpet. So it was my time this particular day. And guess what? They told me for 1 week, I only had to sit behind the desk. I was not, when I went to get the vacuum cleaner, the librarian rushed up to me. She said, oh, no, you're not going to vacuum that. I said, why? I said, it's my turn. No, you're going to stay behind the desk. You're not going to dust. I mean, these are the different types of things we had to do for work study. It wasn't just with the books. But that particular week, all I had to do was sit behind that desk. So I said, okay. During that week, the president asked me to come got word to me to ask me to come to his office. I said, oh my God, what did I do? The president wanted to see me. I'm thinking expulsion, but I don't know why. What did I do? What did I say? And I not only entered the office, but in his private office. I never will forget that black chair and those red drapes behind his black chair. And he asked me to sit, and I did. And he said, we got HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare. And I'm thinking, well, what does that have to do with me? And he explained to me that they were going to interview me and find out how, what kind of experience did I have. So he said, well, do you know what you're going to say? I said, no, sir. And I kept saying to myself, oh my God, I really don't want to talk to them because I really don't want to tell them how I really felt. And something just kept reassuring me. And so sure enough, when they interviewed me, they asked me, could I explain why I was the only black person on that campus for 3 years? And I started to say what was told to me. I said, well, sir, you'll have to ask them. I said, let them explain. And I thought about it prior to the interview. I said, Lord, should I tell the truth or should I just keep my mouth shut? And the thought came to me that said, if you speak the truth, then they may lose funding and you're going to be denied access to a lot of students, especially the students who live in Newberry. You're going to be denied them access. Then another thought came and said, if you don't tell how you feel or what you experience, and if somebody gets hurt on this campus or get killed, then you got to live with that. And finally, the decision was, what right do I have to deny other people access? They have to go through the same thing that I went through. It's their right. And like I said, I didn't offer or volunteer any information that would jeopardize the funding. There were three people that whenever we had any type of public gathering, uh, football games, etc., my grandmother, Carrie Anderson Marshall, my great aunt, who was my grandmother's younger sister, Janie Anderson Gregory, and my second grade school teacher, Miss Jenny K. Gillum. I would carry them to all the events, the receptions, whatever, because I wanted the world to know how proud I was of them. I wanted the world to know these are the people who are responsible for me being on this campus. I would say to them that it's God's plan. We have choices. And I usually reference Jonah and the whale. God had a plan for Jonas. Jonas didn't want to do it. He didn't want to follow the plan. And finally, after being thrown into the whale, he yielded. And he could serve God's purpose. And the outcome was that it was better for the world because he did what God asked him to do. And I thought that initially that I wound up at Newberry College because of the um, because of what occurred between my grandmother and myself. But then I realized that was God's plan from the very beginning, was for me to have enrolled and endured what I had to do. I can talk about it now. I can share things that happen now. But for a long time, I couldn't. People would ask me, well, we want you to come and talk about your experience at Newberry College. No, like I said, I can talk about the good, the bad, but the ugliness overwhelmed the good and the bad. And I, when I, like I said, when I was at Newberry College, I was there by myself for 3 years. In one of my positions as an educator in the classroom, I was the only Black person for 3 years. Although I was with a lot of people, we had orientation the freshman year, I was still lonely. And loneliness can lead to depression and you not be aware of it. It impacted me in a way that I developed mental health issues and didn't realize that I was developing mental health issues based on that experience. And I give you there are situations like that can affect your mental health for a long time. And I guess that experience at Newberry College had prepared me for the workforce. Because nowhere in the world that, for some reason, I felt that the civil rights movement and everything, that we had arrived. But even today, it's quite evident that if we're not vigilant, that we're going to repeat, history is going to repeat itself. And it's going to be worse than it was when we were coming up.
I hope you could hear the pain that's still resident even in her telling of her story. There were some parts that I chose not to include. Parts that were so tender and so sensitive still that may cause additional trauma for even those that are listening. But the resolve that she had to have, the weight that she said on her shoulders of the threat that you and your future generations will never have this opportunity for education. And part of what I learned working as a historian and interviewing some of the people in these Black communities, education was for them one of the ways to advance in life. Getting your education opened up a world of possibilities. It was a little different than sometimes we think of education now. But for that generation, education was the way out of the oppression. And as you could hear, the resolve that it took, being used and then knowing you were used. Having there be good, but having there be bad that was so bad. And it's reconciling that, as you heard her say, there's things that still hurt to even put into words. And part of that is the sense of gratitude that for me, being able to have worked in this capacity as a historian, documenting the history, even the snippet of it, of her experience, of being grateful for her willingness to endure that pain again to even tell the story. To hear her in her own words talk about her motivation and the reality that what she was doing was for the greater good. It wasn't just for herself. She completed her degree, the first Black graduate of Newberry College. She made it through. But to understand that her work, her willingness to stand even when the other 9 didn't show up, is some of the same work that's been done. It's the Ruby Dees. She was a few years older, maybe 10. But to realize that they walk this path alone, not for just their own benefit, for the benefit of everyone who has benefited from the struggle of the 60s, 1966 to 1970, a time where our country was in turmoil, much perhaps like we are now. Some things have changed, so many have not changed enough. But to understand that sometimes change takes doing the hard stuff. And if it were not for individuals like Nandedi being willing to stand and do the hard thing, change doesn't happen. I think sometimes, and this is the social commentary, the Lorana version of it, sometimes we want the solutions to be easy. The reality from history, as she told us, that we should learn from so that we can avoid repeating again, is that change takes first commitment. And then even with the commitment, then it takes the hard work of doing the things that create change. And so this opportunity of spending some time with Nandedi helps me to better appreciate the sacrifices that not just her, there were others, but specifically her made for us to have some of the privileges where those privileges aren't a privilege, they are just an entitlement that we can take if we want to. No one questioned me when I applied to college. No one dictated where I could go or where I could not go. And yes, racism still exists. Yes, things may happen because it's people and it's systems. But to realize that it was through the efforts of people like this who were willing and committed to stand on their own. But as she told the story, I realized it wasn't just her. It was the willingness of the allies to perhaps go against what then would have been social norms to say, I have some experience dealing with Black people and I'm okay with being your friend. That sometimes we forget that when we tell the stories, that yes, she had to stand alone in this journey, but that there were allies who were willing to stand for things that were a whole lot more right than what was going on in 1966 South Carolina. And so for those two, that I can be grateful for those that were willing to stand against what people said was not right, and in some cases was not allowed, to be able to provide her with that emotional support to withstand and be able to stand those 3 years until the other came, but to be able to stand until she finished the task. In 1970, she graduated as the first Black woman graduate of Newberry College in South Carolina. And for that, I can be grateful. I'm grateful for having had the experience. And so at this time, I'd like to turn it over and maybe have a bit of discussion, a bit of conversation about how that struck you, how that resonated for you or impacted you. So if you'd like to share, unmute, and let's maybe have a few minutes of conversation before we leave out of this field trip today and go back to our lives, hopefully changed for the better. Who would like to share?
I found it very interesting that those people at the college think that they could tell her, and yes, back in the 60s, that you and your ancestors will not go to college. You know, because I mean I get it because we call it the good old boy system because I'm in the South, so I get that stuff exists, but I'm like, damn, you know,
Big
and I get. It's interesting how when she's worded at the end, like people want her to come and speak about her time, but there are raw parts of it that really hurt because she had to choose between not being used as a pawn in this whole game, versus she had to choose like for the betterment of the community.
What a weight on a 17-year-old shoulder.
Yeah, versus having the pride of who you are and what you stand for. I mean, she had to push that aside, like for the greater good of future generations and all the community around her. Like she said, the community in Newberry would not be able to go to this, that live right down the road from here, would not be able to go to this school had she not put in her work. And and all I'm thinking of is, of course, her friend, the first person's name is Christine, because that's us Christinas. We're gonna like you. We're gonna say, oh, you think you're gonna do that? No, we're their best friend, and we're gonna go with them everywhere you think that they can't go.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's how we roll.
And it's like if you go back and think about what was happening in the time, like this is still KKK time.
Yep.
We're talking about the unfolding of civil rights, the death of Martin Luther King and Kennedy, and like we're talking about a time that you heard her say she's the first person to graduate high school in her family, and then to be threatened that no one in your family will ever go beyond that level. And again, one of the things I learned by working on that history project was that the only out for them was education. Right. There was no upward mobility without education.
Right.
Education, and at that time, the only option you had were the Black colleges. Benedict and Allen are the Black colleges in Columbia, South Carolina. South Carolina State is the Black college, the HBCU in Orangeburg, South Carolina. So we're talking Deep South. We're talking at a time where even being able to go to college is relatively new. We're only talking about maybe a few decades of time where that was even an option.
Right.
But going to a white institution, a male-dominant white institution, wasn't something that would have been an opportunity for any. And so when we talk about her being the one, she may have been the one out of so many schools that had not made that. And
Right.
the part of this was they needed her. So many times we don't realize the power. And it was interesting to hear her recognize that in that moment, that,
Right. Yes.
oh, I thought I needed you and I needed the education, but you also needed me, because that's the part of history that sometimes we don't hear.
Yep.
We don't
Absolutely.
hear that they were going bankrupt trying to be a private college. They needed those federal funds. And fortunately, by that time, the government, the systematic pieces, whether it's tokenized or not, they had put some things in place that says, if you want our money, you will do what we tell you to do. And so it hurt them economically. But then I look back from a historical standpoint, and I remember a time where I was studying the strategy of Martin Luther King in the Montgomery bus boycott. And a paraphrasing of what I gathered from that was, he said, first of all, we must be prepared because we need to be resilient and be able to withstand until it hurts their pockets. We need to hurt their pockets so much that when they come to the table to negotiate, we will get change. And if you know a little bit about that, it was not a one-day boycott.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah.
They went for weeks and weeks and months and months. And when it finally hurt enough, crisis shifted the paradigm. And so part of that is what I have understood. Paradigms shift, old ones die and new ones replace it. But one of the biggest impacts is crisis. Crisis will shift your paradigm faster than anything. Part of that is the lesson that we can draw from history, that the strategic move of waiting and being prepared when the crisis strikes, she had to apply. She had to be bold enough or crazy enough or just enough of a jokester with her grandmother to apply, thinking that it might not ever be possible. But when the opportunity came, she had to have a commitment to go.
Yeah, because nobody else in her family had ever even gotten close to graduating high school. So
Didn't even know what the
to think
experience was
that
like.
you figure you could even go this far, it was like, wow, a lot.
She's exceeded the place. It's going to places you never dreamed you could get to.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then seeing that there is more. And so to be prepared at 17 years old, we have a hard time with our 17 years old now. Can we get you to a community? Can we just get you a job? Can we get you a little job? And to realize that she was doing this
No clue.
on
I
her
had one of
own,
those.
with the looks and the oppression and the threats. There's some parts where she talks about the threats and she talks about what her grandmother did and how the community had to watch out for her. When she walked, there was someone in the community that was watching her from afar. To hear about how the community came together to try to make her as safe as possible, even though they could not save her from some of the tragedies that she experienced. But to realize that they tried, and from an emotional level of support, to realize there was a community standing behind her because she was living some dreams. When I planned this on the day that was celebrating the abolition of slavery, part of this is the realization. You hear the quote, "You are the thing that your ancestors dreamed of." No, she's not. She's beyond what her ancestors could dream. They did not think that this would ever be possible sometimes in their lifetime. She was living beyond the dreams of her grandmother, the ancestors that would have been enslaved people, even in the places and with the families that she was then going to school with. And so it's a debt of gratitude that we owe to some of these people who are truly the paradigm shifters, who sacrifice with their life. Part of the guilt of even wanting to capture her story was realizing that she would have to tell it. And in telling it, the unhealed parts of that would cause her trauma all over again. And so I'm grateful for her willingness to sacrificially tell her story so that it could be documented, because if it's not documented, it's just memories and memories fade. But when we document it, it's archived and that makes it history. And so I'm grateful for her willingness to share, her willingness to deal with the pain of sharing. I'm grateful for her being able to tell the story. And my hope is that we can learn something from it so that we can garner good from her experiences. Because I believe that goes into her karma account, that there's something good that we're going to get. We're not going to let just the pain go to waste. And I think she ended, where I ended this story was her saying, I'm doing this so that something good can come out of this, so that we never go back to a place that's that hard and that painful. Pain that has lingered now 60 plus years beyond those 4 years that she lived it. Pain that's still lingering in her life and in her heart. That is my sadness, but it makes me grateful that she was willing to make that sacrifice so that others in future generations, I'm a Black woman that's taken advantage of what she did. I've gone on and gotten a bachelor's degree. I've gone on to graduate studies, and I've done it at some schools in the Deep South. And because of her work and the work of others, I'd be remiss to acknowledge the others, but specifically this person that I've had the opportunity to encounter personally, that their work has created change. It may not be all the change we want, but everything in that direction is progress. And so I'm grateful for the sacrifice that she's made and her willingness to share the story so that I can continue to share and so that we can learn from her gift and hopefully get more value that we can put into the situation because of the sacrifices she made. Any other comments and sharing before we end this time together? We want to thank you for coming. Thank you for giving me an opportunity. Some of our field trips are great fun. This one was a lot more serious, but I hope that you will have gained something from our time together, that this too is an exploration, a field trip into the past. And part of this is one of the principles of Sankofa, that hopefully by going back to the past, we can take some things and take them and help us to go forward. So thank you for letting me share her story in her words. I hope that you too have gotten something out of this experience to help us go forward.
Thank you so very much, Luana. I appreciate this. I was very much looking forward to this. So I'm very appreciative. And I'm glad that you've been able to record stories. I mean, our family is Cuban American immigrants on my father's side, and sometimes I wish somebody could record some stories. I have one cousin that recorded his father many years ago, and it's all in Spanish. So at some point, I'm like, please translate, because
that opportunity sparked a passion in me. And part of me retiring says I'm going to do all these passion projects and people telling their stories. Now, the stories that I'm capturing is of people and their healing journeys. I'll be doing some work next year specifically with women, but part of that is about this passion that says it's history when we document it. And it's so powerful in being able to tell your stories. What this did for her, she thanked me for letting her do this. And I thought, you thanking me? We all should be thanking you.
Oh, I was going to add in there. I find it, I appreciate how she's recognized the mental toll, all of this being torn. This really, it's having this, you have to suppress who you are to be who they want you to be. And that creates a huge mental toll on you. And that she recognized that even years later, she was still suffering from that falseness, you could say, in a way, that suppression.
It's called trauma. Yeah. And sometimes even in telling, that was part of the guilt, and gratitude in asking her to share, to know that it's going to cause her harm.
Because we want to hear these historical stories of
there's a cost.
The first Black woman to join we want to hear this story, and you forget, oh, this isn't like it's a triumphant. I mean, there's a lot of pain in this that she did, and then people weren't nice. There were some people that were quite rude and mean and nasty.
It's helped me refocus too. Like, how can we? These are stories we need to capture.
Right.
How can we do it? And one of the things that I've been really thinking about is how can I use the healing work that I do to help capture the stories. The healing work I do is a storytelling process, but it's the storytelling that's done in a way that actually brings healing. How can I perhaps incorporate more of that so that those stories that we need these stories to understand,
Yeah.
like from that different perspective, because her perspective's different from the whites that had the experience. How can we do that and merge that with healing? And that's something I'm working on. And it's one of those things of how to do it, and what does it cost to do that? But that has become a new passion for me, in that public history passion spot of how can I help document these stories, but have them do the storytelling in a way that's merged with healing, so that as they tell the stories, it's healing them.
Yeah.
So that we get the story, but they get the healing, because
Well, and most of the
like
time I will
that.
tell you, when you start telling people your story, when you can tell people your story, it's because now you can heal. So oftentimes I've always
Kind
found
of,
when you start
but
telling it,
yeah,
that
you can,
it
if
becomes
it's
a
done
healing.
with that in mind.
Right. It becomes a healing.
Yeah.
It becomes that,
And she said this helped her to, I don't remember the words she said, but the way I internalized it was it helped to free her in some ways.
Right.
Some of this was, I also shared with her some of the healing tools
Uh-huh.
that I hope can help with some of that processing. But I'm regularly conspiring on ways that I may be able to be a better facilitator of healing and
Right.
historian at the same time. And
Right.
I think
Right.
there's some ways it's just finding the appropriate support to be able to do that, because there's so much more of her story
Right.
that
Yeah.
we
Mm-hmm.
just, the initial interview was about an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
To get to about a 30-minute section. Like I said, there were some parts that I felt were too tender to share
Mm-hmm.
without doing work with the audience,
Right.
the
Yes.
audience
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
hearers, because sometimes hearing about trauma can be traumatizing.
Right.
And so I felt like um, caution
Right.
or care.
Yeah.
I did not feel comfortable sharing all of the story in that way without then, like, we would need to do a healing circle after we did that to be able to really share the wholeness of it, because it's heavy. It's heavy.
Right. Right.
And even for the hearers, it's traumatizing, because sometimes when we are experiencing even the experience of others, even if it's not present time, the way that triggers us, we don't know where everyone comes into the hearing. Life looks on the surface, people can't tell what we're holding, but that there are things that can be triggering. And sometimes the trauma, especially when we're talking about times like this,
Mm-hmm.
could be damaging. And so part of this was really being careful about how to even share the parts of the story that I did. And she had the opportunity to look at the editing and to give the approval that she felt good about the way that the story was shared. And
Right.
so I'm grateful for having her blessing to be able to share her story in a way that she feels would honor the message that she wanted conveyed. That was important to me.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
I'm grateful that I had that opportunity to have that blessed by her, to be able to share this. So I'm grateful for the opportunity, for the work that Atlantic Institute does to be able to let us share the diversity of life and to do it in a way that feels honest. Sometimes you can't sugarcoat it. There's no way to make this feel good. It's bad stuff. It's hard times, but it's honest. This is who we have been. And so, as a community, understanding this too is our history. This is who we've been. And I echo her hope that we never go back there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the principle of Sankofa, it's an African principle that says sometimes we have to go back and get some things, wisdom from the past, to be able to help us go forward. And I think her story and even her words is what that looks like in our life. It's us going back and saying, let's deal with it honestly. Let's know what the facts are. How bad was it? Let's heal. Now, let's not let this happen again, folks. Let's not go back
Amen.
to this place. And
Yep.
so I'm grateful. Thank you, Atlantic Institute. Thank you for those that hear it, not only now, those who, through the magic of technology, will be able to see this on YouTube. Feel free to share this. Feel free to share her story, because us getting value out of it makes her efforts worthwhile. It gives a
Absolutely.
return on the investment. She's already made the payment. So please, if you don't share any of the others, please share. Please share so that others can get value out of the effort that she has sacrificed. She has sacrificed her life, her mental health, the joys of life because of the mental health of carrying such heavy trauma. And so, if nothing else, share this so that this can be part of what helps us to continue to go forward, to develop a stronger resolve and commitment to let this not ever happen again. And so thank you very much. With that, we will end. Let's see. Small PR, wonderful activities through Atlantic Institute. Check out the calendar, watch the Facebook page. I pop up about once a month. Let's see. Next month, I will be taking you on a field trip to the Museum of Forbidden Things. I thought that would be a wonderful thing to do for October. And I have such wonderful museums here that I can lollygag and romp through. So I'll be sharing with you the Museum of Forbidden Things in October. November, I will be sharing.
Don't ask me. I don't remember.
I went blank and I just decided something.
I know. I'm like, you just decided that.
I can't remember. I forget. Something really, really wonderful will be in November, even though I can't quite remember what it is. And there are other of our program facilitators that have wonderful events. Make it a habit of checking in and seeing what kinds of things, and stop in and join me on the next field trip. I think it will be very exciting. It might be a little bit weird and interesting at the same time.
Yeah. Wait, it's November 4th. Ecuador's Dia de las Fuentes, Day of the Dead celebration.
Day of the Dead, November 2nd.
Right.
Whole big thing here.
November 4th. I have 4th of November.
4th, it's right after it, so I can get some stuff from this year. Dia it's the Day of the Dead here, which is actually November 2nd. Little bit different than the Mexican expression of that, or Central America expression of that. Everything here, though, even if we're celebrating the dead, there are festivities, but there's some really interesting things I found out about why they do that, and the belief systems behind it, and the intermixing of this hybrid of religion and spirituality because of the way that the Catholicism and colonialism came in and how they held on to some of their indigenous ways. And the cemeteries are like grand cities. So there'll be some really interesting and exciting. So the next couple of months are going to be really kind of interesting and exciting all at the same time. So that's going to be November 4th. I forgot. Yes, that's going to be November 4th. So October will be the Museum of Forbidden Things, and then Day of the Dead, which is the November 2nd celebration here. We'll be doing that on the 4th, so I can go participate in the festivities and then hurry up and edit them and come back and share them with you. So you guys will kind of feel like you're in the festivities, except y'all won't be eating the treats. I will be eating the treats because play, fireworks, and treats seem to go along with everything. And I asked them, especially the Catholic holidays, does the sweet treats make us more spiritual? And the lady was like, no, we just mix them in so that the religious, spiritual people and the heathens can celebrate together. And I'm like, I'll take that. Fireworks and sweet treats for the heathens, the spiritual practices for the Catholics. And it seems to all work well together. So join me for future events. Check out Atlantic Institute and all the other things they do, the different events and exposure opportunities. And Christine, thank you for the backup help to help me.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Problems. Have a great evening.